Alexander Steele was a man whose name alone could make seasoned businessmen tremble. From towering glass skyscrapers in New York to sprawling estates in Europe, his empire stretched across industries with ruthless efficiency. The financial world hailed him as a genius, but those who worked under him knew a different truth. He was a man of steel, sharp-edged and unyielding, with little tolerance for mistakes and even less for weakness. His boardroom presence was so commanding that even silence bent to his will. Yet, behind the cold efficiency and the impenetrable suits tailored to perfection, Alexander lived in a fortress of solitude. His penthouse mansion, with its chandeliers glittering like frozen stars, was more museum than home. Rare art adorned the walls, but laughter never echoed within them. Servants performed their duties with hushed reverence, careful not to cross the invisible boundary between their world and his. He was respected, envied, and feared, yet never loved. People said he didn't bleed, didn't feel, didn't weep. The billionaire who could crush competitors with a single phone call was also the man who had not shed a tear in decades. To the world, he was untouchable, a monument of success carved from stone. But monuments are hollow. Late at night, when the city lights flickered against his panoramic windows, Alexander sometimes felt the silence pressing too heavily, like a weight he could not shake. His achievements glittered, but his soul was parched. He had everything: jets, yachts, influence, power, yet an unspoken emptiness clung to him. A void he dared not name. And though no one could see it, buried deep beneath the iron mask of his reputation, there was a man who was waiting for something, or someone, to pierce the armor. Amora Johnson walked into the Steele mansion for the first time with her head slightly bowed and her heart beating fast. To her, the marble floors, gilded staircases, and velvet curtains were another world entirely, a place she would have only seen in glossy magazines left on street kiosks. Yet she was not intimidated by grandeur. She had known hardship too long to be shaken by gold. Born in a struggling neighborhood, Amora grew up watching her mother fight against the current of poverty with nothing but resilience and faith. Her father had disappeared when she was a child, leaving her mother to raise her alone. Together, they learned to stretch every coin, to make meals from almost nothing, and to wear clothes until they could not be patched again. When her mother passed away, Amora carried with her not only memories but the single item her mother had cherished most, a thin silver bracelet etched with faint designs, now dulled with time. To anyone else it was worthless. To Amora it was priceless, a piece of love she refused to part with. At the Steele estate, she quickly proved herself. Unlike some who gossiped in corners or slacked when unseen, Amora worked with steady hands and a quiet dignity. She polished, dusted, folded, and scrubbed not just as duty, but as a form of respect for the place she had been entrusted to keep. The other staff, at first skeptical of the new maid, soon found themselves drawn to her calm presence. She was soft-spoken, yet there was strength in her silence, a resilience that made others lower their voices around her as though in reverence. And always, the bracelet remained on her wrist. No matter the task, cleaning floors, carrying laundry, or serving in the dining hall, the delicate circle of silver caught the light. Staff whispered about it, some assuming it was a good luck charm, others thinking it a memory of love. Amora never explained, but whenever her eyes lingered on it, a small, unspoken warmth lit her face. The billionaire's office was a cathedral of power, dark mahogany shelves lined with rare books, a desk polished to a mirror's shine, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a conquest. It was a place few dared to enter without permission. That afternoon, Amora moved quietly across the room, dusting shelves and arranging papers with her usual care, unaware that she was being watched. Alexander Steele sat in his leather chair, his gaze fixed on her, though he would never admit it. Normally, he ignored the presence of staff, treating them as part of the decor, necessary, efficient, but invisible. Yet something about the young maid drew his attention in ways that unsettled him. As she reached to wipe the edge of his desk, the faint glint of silver caught his eye. The bracelet, thin, worn, and oddly familiar, seemed to shimmer in the muted light of his office. For a fleeting second, Alexander's expression shifted. The cold mask cracked, and his normally icy eyes softened with something unspoken, recognition, or perhaps memory. He leaned back, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair. It was absurd, he told himself, to be distracted by a servant's trinket. Yet the sight of it tugged at a place deep within him, a place he had sealed off long ago. Amora, unaware of the silent storm behind his stare, continued her work. She adjusted a paperweight, dusted a frame, and turned toward the shelves, her bracelet glimmering with each movement. Alexander's jaw tightened. He did not ask, though the question burned in his throat. Instead, he dismissed her curtly, retreating back into his fortress of silence. But even after she left, the glint of silver lingered in his mind like a shadow he could not shake. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse library, a glass of aged scotch untouched on the table before him. The city outside sparkled with a million lights, each one a reminder of the empire he ruled. Yet, all he saw was the faint shimmer of a bracelet on a maid's wrist. It was absurd, he told himself again. He was Alexander Steele, billionaire, tycoon, master of the financial world. His mind was built for logic, for numbers, for ruthless decisions. But no matter how hard he tried, the image of that fragile piece of silver would not leave him. Slowly, memories began to surface, hazy, like photographs faded by time. A small boy, no older than 8, frightened and lonely. A house filled with coldness, voices raised in anger, hands that pushed instead of held. And then, amid the storm, there had been her. A woman with gentle eyes and warm laughter. She was not family, not by blood, but by something deeper, kindness. He remembered her hand brushing his hair back when he cried in secret. The way she hummed lullabies no one else cared to sing. She had worn a bracelet, simple, silver, etched with faint designs. He hadn't thought of it in years, but now he saw it clearly, flashing like a beacon through the fog of memory. Alexander set his glass aside and rose abruptly, pacing the room. It couldn't be the same. That was a lifetime ago, a chapter buried under layers of steel and success. And yet, the resemblance was undeniable. His chest tightened in a way he didn't like. Vulnerability was dangerous, emotions were weaknesses he had long since exiled. With a sharp shake of his head, he tried to banish the thought. It was coincidence, nothing more. But as he stood by the window, staring at his own reflection in the glass, Alexander knew the truth. The bracelet had cracked something inside him. A door he thought locked forever was beginning to creak open. And no matter how hard he tried to brush it off, the ghost of that woman's kindness, tied to a maid's wrist, refused to let him go. The following morning, Alexander entered his office earlier than usual. He didn't need to be there. Most of his business was handled through calls and meetings elsewhere. But he waited, his mind restless, his gaze fixed on the door. When Amora finally appeared with her cleaning cart, she greeted him softly, her voice respectful but steady. She bent to dust the edge of his desk, and again the bracelet caught the light. That small glimmer ignited something sharp inside him, questions he did not want to ask, yet could not silence. "Where did you get that?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Amora froze. For a moment, she wasn't sure what he meant. Her eyes followed his line of sight to her wrist, and her breath caught. Instinctively, she tugged her sleeve lower, as though to shield the bracelet from scrutiny. "It belonged to my mother," she said quietly, her tone respectful but firm. Alexander's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Do not lie to me. That design. I've seen it before." Her lips parted, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but she held her ground. "I would never lie about her, sir. This is all I have left of her." The words, simple yet weighted with grief, pierced deeper than he expected. Alexander felt his composure waver, and to cover it, he let his tone grow harsher. "Don't think sentiment excuses you from your duties. Keep your mind on your work." Amora nodded quickly, lowering her gaze. She returned to dusting in silence, but her hands trembled slightly. Alexander turned away, pretending to busy himself with papers. Inside, however, his heart thundered, his confusion burning like fire he could not extinguish. That night, sleep refused to claim Alexander Steele. He tossed beneath crisp linen sheets, staring up at the ceiling of his vast, dimly lit bedroom. The empire he had built never failed him, yet now, the thought of a maid's bracelet kept gnawing at his mind like a relentless echo. Finally, with a sharp exhale, he rose and crossed the room to a locked cabinet tucked discreetly in the corner. Few knew it existed, and even fewer would believe the cold billionaire kept anything sentimental inside. He drew out a small wooden box, polished with age but scarred at its edges. Inside lay remnants of a past he rarely revisited, faded photographs, brittle letters, and a child's journal with uneven handwriting. He spread them across his desk, the harsh light of a lamp illuminating fragments of memory he had long buried. There, between the pages of an old photograph album, he saw her. The woman with kind eyes, smiling faintly as she held a younger Alexander close. And on her wrist, gleaming in black and white, was the same bracelet. Identical etchings, identical curve of silver, the same faint charm hanging from its loop. His chest tightened as his fingers brushed over the image. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. The memories rushed in like a flood, her gentle laughter, her protective embrace, her voice whispering comfort when no one else cared. He remembered tugging at that bracelet as a child, fascinated by its shine and her warm chuckle as she let him play with it. Now, decades later, it had returned, circling the wrist of a maid in his own house. Alexander closed his eyes, pressing a hand against his forehead. The resemblance was undeniable, and with it came a truth he wasn't ready to face. The mansion was quieter than usual that evening. Most of the staff had retired to their quarters, and Alexander found himself wandering the hallways, restless and unable to drown the unease gnawing at him. He was on his way to the library when soft voices drifted from the servants' lounge, the door slightly ajar. Normally, he would have ignored it. He had no reason to linger where his employees gathered. But a name caught his ear, Mother. He paused, standing in the shadow of the hallway, listening. Amora sat on a worn sofa, speaking quietly with another maid. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone unspooling memories that lived close to the heart. She never had much, Amora said, her hands folded over the bracelet as though guarding it. But what she gave me was everything. She worked in other people's homes, scrubbing floors and washing clothes until her hands bled. She made sure I went to school even when she couldn't afford shoes for herself. And no matter how tired she was, she'd smile and tell me I was her miracle. The other maid listened with quiet sympathy. Amora's voice trembled slightly as she continued. When she was sick, I wanted her to rest, but she refused to stop working. She said dignity wasn't about wealth, it was about holding your head high, even when life tried to break you. The night she passed, she gave me this bracelet. She said, as long as you wear it, remember you come from strength. Her fingers caressed the silver band, worn smooth by years of love and loss. Alexander's breath caught. Each word pulled him deeper into memory, aligning too closely with the shadows of his own past. The woman Amora described, the sacrifices, the quiet strength, the very same bracelet, it was no stranger to him. It was the echo of the woman who had once shielded him in his youth. His throat tightened. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. The maid who dusted his bookshelves was not just a servant in his house. She was the living link to the only softness his childhood had ever known. The next day, Alexander summoned Amora to his office. His tone over the intercom was clipped, but his hands trembled as he set aside the papers on his desk. For hours he had debated with himself, torn between disbelief and the truth that had gnawed at him since overhearing her story. Now there was no avoiding it. He had to know. Amora entered quietly, her cleaning cart left in the hallway. She clasped her hands in front of her, eyes lowered in respect. You asked for me, sir. Alexander rose from his chair, every movement taut with strain. His eyes fixed on her wrist, where the bracelet caught the light as it always did. He stepped closer, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Let me see it. Confused, Amora hesitated, but she slowly extended her hand. Alexander took it carefully, his fingers brushing against hers, and lifted the bracelet into the light. For the first time, he saw it clearly, the tiny engraving on the inner band, faded but still legible, to L.J., with gratitude. His chest constricted. That was it. The mark he had seen as a boy, the secret engraving he once traced with small fingers when he sat on that woman's lap. The world seemed to tilt. His iron mask, so carefully forged through years of power and pride, shattered in an instant. His breath hitched, his vision blurred, and before he could stop himself, tears welled in his eyes. Amora's own eyes widened as she watched the man the world believed unbreakable falter before her. Alexander released her wrist and pressed his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking. 4 decades, he had not shed a single tear, not at funerals, not in defeat, not even in betrayal. But now, before a maid and a memory, the dam inside him broke. I remember her, he whispered hoarsely, voice cracking under the weight of grief and gratitude long buried. Your mother, she saved me. And for the first time in a lifetime, Alexander Steele wept. Alexander sank into his chair, his usually perfect composure shattered. Amora stood frozen, uncertain whether to comfort him or retreat. She had never seen him like this, his face bare of authority, his eyes glassy with grief. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice raw. When I was a boy, he began slowly, I was left with relatives who treated me as little more than a burden. My parents were gone, and all I knew was cruelty. They fed me scraps, locked me away when I cried, told me I was nothing. His fists clenched, then loosened. But there was one person who defied them. A housemaid. She risked her place, even punishment, to sneak me food, to sing me to sleep when I couldn't stop shaking. She was the only kindness I knew. Amora's lips parted, her heart pounding. She wore this bracelet, Alexander continued, his gaze fixed on her wrist. I remember holding it in my hands as a child, playing with the engravings when she hugged me. Before I was sent away, I gave it to her. I told her it was my promise, that one day, if I became someone, I'd repay her. His voice broke, and he lowered his eyes. But I never found her again. I buried it all, convinced I'd imagined the comfort she gave me. Amora's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision as the pieces fell into place. That was my mother, she whispered. She told me of a boy she once cared for, a boy who was sad and lonely, who clung to her like she was his only friend. She never told me his name, only that he had given her this bracelet. Her hand brushed over the silver band, reverent. She said it was her most precious gift. The air in the room thickened with something larger than coincidence, destiny, perhaps, or divine design. Alexander looked at Amora with eyes that were no longer cold, but overflowing with recognition and guilt. All these years, he murmured, and fate brings her daughter into my home. I owe her everything. And I owe you more than I can ever repay. For the first time, the billionaire felt small, not in power, but in humility, before the legacy of a woman's love. The days that followed marked a quiet but undeniable shift within Alexander Steele. The man once known for his cold indifference and razor-sharp authority began to soften, as though the discovery of Amora's connection to his past had cracked the armor he had worn for decades. It started subtly. The staff noticed he no longer barked orders but spoke them with measured calm. When one of the cooks burned her hand in the kitchen, Alexander appeared unexpectedly with the first aid kit, kneeling beside her and instructing her to rest. The household buzzed with whispers. No one had ever seen the billionaire stoop so low as to tend to an injury himself. At meetings, his board members found him more patient, listening before cutting others off. His tone no longer carried the same sting of arrogance, but rather a controlled steadiness, as though he was relearning how to be human. The newspapers began to speculate, the softer Steele. Reporting on small philanthropic gestures he had made anonymously but which inevitably reached the public eye. To Amora, the changes were even more profound. He would stop by the servants' quarters, asking if they had eaten or needed anything, gestures so foreign that at first the staff responded with suspicion. But when his concern proved consistent, they began to trust it. She saw in him not the untouchable titan the world feared, but the boy her mother once comforted, finally emerging from the shadows of his past. Even in his mansion, the oppressive silence lifted. Laughter sometimes echoed in the halls, carried by staff who no longer tiptoed in fear. For the first time, the Steele estate felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The world outside marveled at the change. The ruthless billionaire was still powerful, still commanding, but now he carried a gentleness that disarmed people. He had become approachable, even admirable, not because of his wealth, but because he had remembered how to feel. With Alexander's transformation came an inevitable shift in how he treated Amora. He no longer saw her as just a maid but as the daughter of the woman who had once saved his spirit. Subtle acts of favor began to appear, lighter duties assigned to her, gifts left at her door, an offer for her to move into better quarters within the mansion. But Amora resisted. When Alexander suggested she stop cleaning and instead manage the staff, she shook her head firmly. I don't want a position I haven't earned, she told him, her voice respectful but unyielding. I came here to work, not to be pitied. Her words struck him deeply. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even dependence. Instead, she held her ground with the same quiet dignity her mother had embodied. She didn't crave wealth or privilege, she wanted respect, the kind not bought with money but given to those who stood tall even when life tried to bend them. At first, Alexander struggled with her refusal. He wanted to make amends, to pour his resources into repaying a debt he felt could never truly be repaid. But the more he tried, the more he realized that honoring Amora's pride meant stepping back, allowing her independence to shine. Over time, their bond shifted into something stronger than obligation. Their conversations, once formal, grew into moments of genuine connection. He shared fragments of his haunted childhood, she spoke of her mother's strength and her own dreams of a better future. Between them, there grew a mutual understanding, an acknowledgement that dignity and respect were worth more than gold. And in honoring her pride, Alexander found a deeper way to honor the woman who had once saved him. The grand ballroom glittered under chandeliers, the air filled with the hum of violins and murmurs of the city's elite. It was the annual Steel Foundation Gala, where billionaires and dignitaries gathered to flaunt their wealth under the guise of charity. Alexander Steele was expected to appear as he always had, impeccable, commanding, untouchable. But this night was different. When he stepped onto the stage, all eyes turned. His sharp tuxedo gleamed under the lights, but it was the softness in his expression that startled those who knew him. Standing a few steps behind was Amora, dressed simply yet radiating quiet grace. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Alexander cleared his throat, gripping the microphone. For years, many of you have known me as a man of power. Some of you have feared me. Others have envied me. But very few have truly known me. His gaze swept the room before settling on Amora. This young woman is dear to my heart. She is not just a member of my household staff, she is the daughter of the woman who once saved me when I was a boy. Without her mother's kindness, I would not be the man standing before you today. Gasps rippled through the room. The billionaire known for his iron will was speaking not of profits or power, but of gratitude and vulnerability. He took a steady breath. For decades, I did not cry. I thought strength meant never showing weakness. But I wept when I saw her bracelet, because it reminded me that true strength is born from compassion. The audience was stunned. In that moment, Alexander Steele was no longer just the feared titan of industry. He was a man transformed. In the weeks after the gala, life inside the Steele mansion no longer carried the weight of silence it once had. There was laughter now, conversation, even warmth flowing through the marble halls that had for years felt like a frozen museum. But for Alexander, one object held more meaning than all his art, jewels, and possessions combined: the bracelet. He asked Amora if he might keep it, not to take ownership, but to safeguard it as the most precious reminder of the woman who had given him back his humanity. She agreed, on the condition that it would always remain a shared treasure, belonging to both of them. Together, they placed it in a glass case in his study, not hidden away, but displayed openly, so every visitor would know its story. For Alexander, the bracelet was no longer just a trinket from childhood. It was a lifeline across time, binding him to the only person who had shown him love when he was most broken, and now to her daughter who had unknowingly reopened his heart. Amora, once just a maid in his household, now stood taller than ever. She continued her work with the same dignity as before, but within Alexander's heart, she had taken on a far greater role. She was family, living proof of resilience, compassion, and strength passed down through generations. Together, they honored her mother's memory not with extravagant gestures, but with quiet acts of kindness, funding schools, supporting single mothers, and opening opportunities for those who had none. The billionaire who once thought only of empires now built legacies of compassion. And as Alexander stood by the bracelet one evening, watching it glimmer softly under the light, he finally understood the truth. The man who once thought wealth made him powerful realized tears and gratitude made him truly human.